Noah was a God-fearing man, and he had a personal relationship with God. He worked with God hand in hand, if you will, for 100 years as he was building the ark. And for 100 years, God and Noah communicated with each other. And all that time, Noah was telling people to repent. It's time to repent, turn away. Remember we said repent a couple weeks ago? It means to turn around, head in a different direction. It's time to turn away from that direction you're headed and go the other way. And so Noah and his family and all of these animals spent 377 days on the ark, caring for each other and worshiping God. And the ark came to a rest on a mountain. Eventually we hear that in the story, you know that. So let's check out our story beginning in chapter 9, Genesis 9, beginning with verse 12. Here's what it says. And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I bring clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant, I will remember my promise between me and you and all living creatures of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood and destroy all life. Whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures of every kind on the earth." And so God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant I have established between me and all life on the earth." And he said, when that happened, that he would never destroy the earth again by a flood. Remember that? He said there would never be another flood. Then look in verses 18 and 19, Genesis 9, 18, 19, or 18, I'm sorry. "And the son of Noah that went forth from the ark, the sons of Noah that went forth from the ark were Shem and Ham and Japheth. And Ham is the father of Canaan. So these are the three sons of Noah, and of them the whole earth was overspread." Imagine being able to trace your ancestors. I had somebody who was really proud one day, and they came up to me and they said, "I can trace my ancestry back to the Mayflower." I said, "Wow, I can trace mine back to the ark." Right? I can trace it all the way back to the ark. White, black, yellow, red, it doesn't matter. We all came from those 8 people, from that same family. And Genesis 9:20 says, "And Noah began to be a husbandman, and he planted a vineyard." And so all of a sudden, Noah now has a new occupation. He was a carpenter, and I imagine he stayed a good carpenter. He probably built some fine houses out of the materials that he had in the boat. But now he has to change profession, so to speak, and he becomes a husbandman. And basically that's a farmer. Translated, it literally means a man of the earth. So now he left, if you want to, he left this ship, this ark that was floating on the waters by the grace of God, and now he's come to earth. Genesis 9:21. "And he drank of the wine and was drunken, and he was uncovered within his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his 2 brethren without. And Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it upon both their shoulders and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were backward, and they saw not their father's nakedness." They put a sheet behind him or a blanket or something behind him and walked into the tent backwards and then threw it on him to cover up his nakedness. "And Noah," verse 24, "awoke from the wine and knew what his younger son had done unto him. And he said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. And he said, Blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and Canaan shall be their servant." Now, one day Noah decides, he's a farmer, he's raising grapes, and he decides to sample the grapes. But the only problem is he sampled them in the form of wine, and he got drunk. And we don't know what went on inside the tent. Nobody really knows, but the language is quite clear here that whatever it was, it involved him and his son, and it was immoral. But his other sons, Shem and Japheth, when they learned of it, they took this garment and they walked in backwards and they covered him. Now, the first thing I can say about that story is that some people don't believe it ever happened. Have you ever heard those people before? There's no such story as a worldwide flood. That never happened. It would be impossible to have a worldwide flood. There wasn't enough water. Well, first off, the water came from the deep. We know that. But anyway, they just don't believe in that story, and they don't believe in the age of some of the old patriarchs in the Bible, how long people lived. For instance, Noah lived to be 950 years old. Isn't that amazing? 950 years old. And Methuselah, his grandson, has the honors of being the longest living individual ever born, if you will. He was 969 years old. So they lived a long time back then, and you can imagine how quickly the earth was being repopulated back then, because I can't remember the exact figures, but if you take one man and a woman, and they have two sons, and they are married, and then those two have two, and those two and have two, and it only takes a few generations to get up to a few million people. And what happens is that this is what was happening then. The world was quickly becoming, the known world at that point was quickly becoming overpopulated. So anyway, to prove their point that people don't believe in the book of Genesis, nor of the flood, they twist it around and they say this. Some people study the Bible. I was that person. I was really a terrible person. Before I came to Christ, I had a pastor friend. He was a friend of mine, and we'd go fishing and we'd do a lot of things together, but he was a believer and I wasn't. So I'd always read through the Bible and try to, stump him, just say, hey, well, what about this? And what about that? And what about this? And he always had an answer. And after about 6 months of answering all my questions, one day I said to him, you probably heard, some of you have heard this, I said, well, I have another question. And he said, I'm not going to take it. And I said, what do you mean you're not going to take it? He said, you got enough information now to hang yourself. You make the choice. And I made the choice right then and there to accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior. However, what happens, Genesis 2:17 says this, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of, for in the day of thou eatest thereof. I got stuck in the old King James book, didn't I? But the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die. So people will say, I don't believe in any of that, and here's why I don't. Here's a point that said right there, on the day that you eat of the fruit, you will surely die. That's what it says, doesn't it? Well, they didn't die. They lived to be 950 years old, and his grandson lived to be 969 years old. So what's going on? Well, some folks try to just pass it away by saying, oh, he's talking about spiritual death. He's not talking about physical death. God was meaning spiritual death at the time. Well, that's not true, because the same word death is used throughout the Bible over and over and over again, and it means dead. It means spiritual, physical death, and not spiritual death. So how do we reconcile this? Because if there's an error in the problem, if there's a problem with an error in the Bible, if there's one error, how many more are there, right? Well, that's an error, and then that's an error, and that's an error, and that's an error, and that's what they do. They keep piling these things on us. But thankfully, if you want to know the answer to a question, the best place to turn is where? The Bible. Why? Because it translates itself. The Bible constantly translates itself. If you're stuck in a rut and you can't figure something out, keep going. Keep reading your Bible and you will find it. It's in there somewhere. You have to be diligent. You may not get the answer today, you might not get it tomorrow, but you will eventually get the answer. And in this case, we find the answer in 2 Peter 3:8, where Peter says this. He says, but beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as what? One day. One day. So knowing this, let's look at this mystery again, right? Noah died 50 years short of 1,000 years old, right? And then Methuselah died 31 years short of 1,000 years. Now, when you're 900 years old, what's a few years? Right? I mean, you've already been collecting your SS for a long, long time. But in God's reckoning, what happened? They both died on the day they were born. The way God sees time, they both died on the same same day they were born again. What does it matter if they had another 50 years or another 31 years? It mattered because God told them you would die on the day that you eat of that apple. Then they'll come back, and this is a good one too. They say things like this. This is things I used to say. Genesis 6:3. They'll say, well, what about this one? Genesis 6:3 says, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. So how do we reconcile that in the Bible? They ate the apple. On the day they ate of the apple, they were surely going to die. We know what happened there. But then he says, my spirit will not always strive with man, for that he is also flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. Well, I don't know. Has anybody lived to be over 120 years? Have you heard? I've heard that there have been people, but that's not what we're after anyway. I don't care how long you live. I just hope I don't live that long. But they say it's wrong, but they say, perhaps somebody lived to be over 120 years, so obviously the Bible is wrong. But let's look at that and see what they're thinking of. 2 Peter 3, 6, 7. He says this. First off, we know that God wasn't talking about man. Who was he talking about? Mankind. He wasn't talking about one specific individual. He was talking about mankind as a whole. I will only strive with the sins of mankind for 120 years. And Peter says this. He says, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. So we're looking back at the flood. We had the flood. The world was flooded with water and everybody perished. But the heavens and the earth, which are now, that's the ones that you and I know, by the same word are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of godly men. Perdition means agony, a time in hell. So look at 6:3 again one more time. My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that is also flesh, that his days shall be 120 years. Once again, we have to look at the Bible for answers. He says 120 year. How is it a lunar year? The Jews had a lunar year, right? They maintained the calendar by the moon. We have a solar year. We maintain our calendar by the sun. So the Jews, every once in a while, every 3 or 4 years, they had to add another month in because they were a little bit behind. But a year was still basically a year. I mean, it wasn't 120 years was made up of years. So obviously, there's another year in the Bible, and we find that year in the book of Leviticus. Chapter 25, and it's called, have you heard of it, the Jubilee? Yeah. The Jubilee? Okay. It says, Leviticus 25, a Jubilee shall be that 50th year. See, you have 50 years in a Jubilee. So every 50 years, you have a Jubilee. And in it you shall neither sow nor reap what grows of itself, nor gather the grapes from the undressed vines, for it is a Jubilee, and it shall be holy to you, and you shall eat what it yields out in the fields. I believe that this year, if I remember rightly, I believe this year is a Jewish Jubilee year. And let me explain to you how you get that. The first thing that you do is it's a cycle of years. So the first thing you have is 6 years. You start off, you have the Jubilee. Then you have 6 years. And then on the 7th year, and you can till your land and plow your land and grow your crops. Then on the 7th year, you stop and you let the field just go clean. Just let it rest. Let it rejuvenate itself. Let it restore itself. When I was a kid on the farm, we used to call rain poor man's fertilizer. I don't know if you ever heard that before, but we call rain poor man's fertilizer because it takes the nitrogen out of the air when it falls, and it puts the nitrogen on the ground, and that's what turns flowers and plants green, and that's what makes plants grow and flowers grow and crops grow. And so they would do this for 6 years in a row. So you do 6 years, let the field rest. 6 years, let the field rest, and so on. On the 7th year, you would do 6 years, let the field rest, and then let it rest 1 more year. So you had 6 times 7 is, carry the odd, 42. Then you added another week, and that was 49 years. And then you added another day, and that was 50 years. So if Jesus Christ was talking about 50 years, well, let me do this first. Have you ever heard of James Ussher? James Ussher. He was a Scottish pastor, archbishop actually in Ireland back in the but from 1625 to about 1656. He was an archbishop in Scotland. And he began reading Genesis 5:1. Now let me just read some of it to you because you need to understand what he was reading. He was reading the book of the generations from Adam all the way up through. From Adam all the way to Noah. And it starts like this. We used to call it the begat book. Remember that? So-and-so begat so-and-so and begat so-and-so. This is the book of generations of Adam. In the day that God created man, in the likeness God made he him. Male and female created he them, and he blessed them and called their name Adam in the day when they were created. And Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness after his image, and he called his son Seth. So we know that from the day that he was created, he lived 130 years, and then he had a son. And the days of Adam after he begotten Seth were 800 years, and he begat sons and daughters. And all the days Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. So now we have some years, right? We know that Adam and Eve were created, and they went 900 years. And Seth, which was Adam's son, lived 105 years and begot Enos. And Seth lived after he begat Enos 807 years, and he begat sons and daughters, and all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. And so skipping now to verse 32, we learn that Noah was 500 years old, and Noah begat Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And so what Usher did is he went back. He followed the genealogy back because we know the time period that Noah lived, right? We know that historically. We know it in the Bible historically. And he pulled this all the way back to the very beginning, this genealogy. He followed it backwards, and he came up with what? 4004 BC. There's a Bible up there on the back shelf. It was printed in the early 1800s, and I have one at home. When you open up the first page of the Bible, the Genesis in the margin, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and over there's a date, 4004 BC. So, if you're taking notes, write this down. We know now that the Genesis is the year we're talking of the year that we're talking about is 50 years long. The Jubilee year is 50 years long. And if God is only going to strive for man for 120 years, what can you do? You can take 50 times 120, right? And what is that? 6,000 years. We're getting pretty close to that, aren't we? If Jesus was born, and if creation was in 4004 BC, if Adam and Eve were born, and he's only going to strive with us for 120 years or 6,000 years, we're getting really close to the end of time, aren't we? As a matter of fact, the 6,000 year time period that God said that he will only strive with man's sin for ended in 1996. 1996. Which means we have seen the 50th Jubilee, haven't we? We have seen that last Jubilee, that 6,000 year period, which means to me, we probably won't see another 50, because that would be too long, wouldn't it? And the Bible would be an error. And so if you look at that, that's what, 2046 or 23 years away. So get your bags packed, put them in the closet. But that's not what I wanted to talk to you about. Can you believe that? I go off on a tangent sometime. I was writing this and putting it together, and all of a sudden I think, wait a minute, I got so far away from Noah and the ark, I don't know where I am. So let's look at Noah and the ark for just a minute now. Noah's on the ark for all this time. He's with God for 100 years, building an ark. He's a God-fearing man. He's a godly man. He gets off the ark. He gets his head out of the clouds. He puts his feet on the earth. He becomes an earthly man. He comes digging in the soil. He becomes attached to the earth. He grows a bunch of grapes and gets drunk. Basically, that's the story, right? Why did God, well, now we go back again. Why did God want to destroy the earth? Why do we have a Noah and the flood in the first place? Well, let's look at Genesis 6, 1 through 7. And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, the daughters were born to them. that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. Now, who are the sons of God all the time in the Bible? Who are they? Angels, right? In this particular case, demon angels, all right? And what do demon angels do? They possess mankind. They can't have relations with a woman on their own. That's impossible. They're spiritual and we're all physical. But they can possess men and procreate children that way. Remember the guy in the cemetery? The guy with Legion? When Jesus asked him, "What's your name?" He said, "My name is Legion, because there's so many of us in here." He was demon-possessed. He ran around naked all of the time in a cemetery, scaring the dickens out of people. And he was a very bad, scary man. Well, that was mankind at this time. Everybody on earth was possessed by demons at that particular time. And so in Genesis 6:3-4, the Lord said, "My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he is also flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. There it is. That's why we got this. I'm going to destroy all those people, and from this point on, our days will only be that, or for our days, the whole, not from that point on, from the beginning, our days will only be 120 years. And it says, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men and bare children to them, the same mighty men which of old are men of renown. And so the angels were possessing mankind and having relations with women. And verse 5 said, God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination, every thought of his heart was only evil. There are folks like that today out there, isn't there? You know them, you've seen them before. They're evil, 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 evil people. And it repented the Lord that it was made him sorry, and it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. The Lord said, I will destroy man who have I created from the face of the earth, both man and beast and the creeping things and the fowls of the air, for it saddens me that I have made them. So the earth is multiplying, men and women are growing, it's again, the numbers, because people live so long, the numbers are incredible, the numbers of people on the earth. And he had to destroy it with a flood. But that's not what I want to talk to you about either. So Noah's back on the porch now, right? He's worked in his garden, he's picked some grapes, he's made some wine, and he's sitting on his front porch and he's drinking wine or whatever he's doing, and things are good, right? I mean, seriously, things are good. He's got a family, he's growing, he's built himself a house, he's built himself a vineyard. He took his heads out of the clouds and he planted his feet on the ground. And the first thing that happened was what? Sin. Sin. More sin entered into the world. And it didn't enter by demons. This time it entered by a guy that was doing great. And generally speaking, that's when they hit me. I don't know about you, but that's when they hit me. When I'm just coasting through life and everything's right and everything's perfect. Boom, there's a sin. Ice cream was BOGO last week, Publix. So Sherry picked out 1 gallon that she liked. I picked out a gallon that I liked. And so I went home, and at midnight, I like to eat ice cream. I stay awake until, all hours of the night. So I'm eating ice cream. And after 2 days, it was gone. And I thought, well, we should have gotten some more. But then there were Sherry's. And so I started eating that, and after 2 days, it was gone. And so on the weekend, she said, hey, I'm going to have a bowl of ice cream. How about you? And I said, no, I don't want it. Well, I can tell you, I'm not going to tell you what she said, but I can tell you one thing, I'll never eat her ice cream again. So. But there's consequences to sin. Everything was going great. I was studying, I was reading, I was eating ice cream. It was beautiful. And I'm right in the middle of a sin. The other thing is I shouldn't have told you that story. And here's why. Because we shouldn't tell stories on other people's sin, should we? We should keep that to ourselves. We all sin. So now you know I'm a sinner. I was hoping that I would sit up here forever, but you know I'm not. But at the same time, we can't go around telling people about all of the sins, can we? What happens? What happens? If you're good friends with Sherry, you probably don't like me very much right now because I ate her ice cream. And that's the way friendships go, and that's the way we lose friends, and that's the way things happen. We need to overlook sin. We need to just get around it and say, I'm a sinner, you're a sinner, we're all sinners, welcome back. Take your feet out of the earth and put your head back in the sky. Right? One more thing, we'll end with this. Well, let's look at this, Luke 6:36. Therefore be merciful, just as your Father also is merciful. Judge not, and you shall not be judged. Condemn not, and you shall not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. Hey, you remember this one? It will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running all over will be put into your bosom. For with the same measure that you use, it will be measured back to you. I hear this all the time. I watch some of those sharks, I was going to say, some of those preachers, those prosperity preachers on TV, just so I can get upset and talk to them. And they always say, oh, give me $100 and it'll come back $1,000. It'll be given to you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be put into your bosom. So give me $100, you'll get 1,000. Give me $1,000, you'll get 10,000. This has nothing to do with money. Not a thing to do with money. What's he talking about? Grace. Grace. See, Sherry didn't tell you that story, I did. Because she gave me grace. Not that night, it was a couple days later. But she did shed grace. And that's what we have to do. We have to do the exact same thing. So imagine coming to a church where you're listening to the message and the pastor starts off here, then he goes over here, then he goes back here, then he goes over here, and then he goes here. That would be a mess, wouldn't it? You just witnessed a mess.